The stars had never looked so cold to Ambassador Zixthar. He stood in the observation deck of the Council headquarters, watching the distant glow of burning worlds. The Kravoth invasion had begun 3 weeks ago, and already 12 planets had fallen. The screams of billions echoed through emergency channels before going silent, one by one. Zixthar belonged to the Valonian species, a people known across the galaxy for their diplomacy and peaceful nature. His skin shimmered with soft blue patterns that reflected his emotional state. Right now, those patterns pulsed with deep purple, the color of fear and despair. He had spent 2 centuries working for peace in the galaxy. Now he watched that peace crumble like dust. The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with panicked voices. Representatives from 47 different species argued and shouted. Some demanded immediate military action. Others suggested surrender. A few proposed abandoning the outer worlds to save the core systems. Zixthar listened to them all and felt his hope dying. The Kravoth were unlike any enemy the Council had faced before. They came from beyond the mapped regions of space, from the dark zones where no civilized species dared to venture. Their ships moved faster than anything the Council possessed. Their weapons cut through defensive shields like they were made of paper. Their soldiers fought with a brutality that shocked species who had known peace for generations. The Council had tried to fight back. Their fleet, once the pride of the galaxy, had engaged the Kravoth at the Battle of Sendara Prime. The battle lasted 4 hours. When it ended, 3,000 Council ships floated dead in space. The Kravoth fleet had lost 17 vessels. That was when the real panic set in. The Council military command admitted what everyone feared. They could not win this war. Not with their current technology. Not with their current tactics. The Kravoth were simply too advanced, too aggressive, too ruthless. Lyraset entered the chamber quietly. She was a scientist from the research division, specializing in xenobiology and the study of developing species. Her species, the Theron, had large eyes that could see into the ultraviolet spectrum. Those eyes now focused on the chaos around her with careful observation. She carried a datapad that glowed with information that might save them all or might condemn them to an even worse fate. She approached Ambassador Zixthar because she knew he would listen. He was desperate enough to consider options that others would reject immediately. The ambassador looked at the datapad and felt his blood run cold for the second time that day. The screen showed a blue and green planet orbiting a yellow star. Beautiful from space, but the data beneath painted a very different picture. The planet was classified as a Class 12 death world, one of the most dangerous ratings in the Council database. The gravity was crushing. The atmosphere was thick with oxygen, a highly reactive and dangerous gas. The planet experienced violent weather patterns that could destroy entire cities. Tectonic plates shifted constantly, causing earthquakes that registered higher than most species could survive. The oceans contained salt that would poison most Council species. The temperature swings from day to night were extreme, but that was not the worst part. The planet teemed with life and almost all of it was deadly. Microorganisms that could kill in hours. Plants that produced toxins capable of stopping a heart. Animals that hunted with claws, teeth, venom, and pure predatory intelligence. The food chain was a constant war for survival, yet somehow a species had risen to dominance on this nightmare world. They called themselves humans. They had not just survived on this planet. They had thrived. They had built civilizations, created art, developed science, and reached for the stars despite every obstacle their world threw at them. Lyraset had been studying Earth and its inhabitants for 5 years. She had intercepted their radio signals and television broadcasts. She had analyzed their literature, their movies, their history. What she found both fascinated and terrified her. Humans were warriors, not because they chose to be, but because their world demanded it. They had spent thousands of years fighting each other, developing weapons and tactics in endless conflicts. They understood warfare in ways that peaceful Council species could barely comprehend. They had created weapons capable of destroying their own planet multiple times over. Their bodies had adapted to their harsh environment. They were stronger than most Council species, able to lift and carry weights that would crush others. They could run for hours without stopping, an ability almost unique in the galaxy. They could survive injuries that would kill other beings. They could eat foods that were toxic to others and drink water contaminated with bacteria that would devastate other species. Their minds were equally impressive. They were problem solvers, able to think creatively under pressure. They could adapt to new situations rapidly. They had something Lyraset struggled to quantify in her reports, a refusal to give up even when all logic said they should surrender. Ambassador Zixthar read through the data 3 times. Each time he felt his fear grow alongside a strange new emotion, hope, dangerous, desperate hope. The Council had a prime directive. They never contacted species that had not yet developed faster than light travel. Humans were close, maybe 10 or 20 years away, but they were not there yet. Making contact would violate thousands of years of Council tradition and law. But tradition and law meant nothing if the Council ceased to exist. The Kravoth were not going to stop. They would keep advancing, keep conquering, keep killing until every Council world was ashes and slaves. Zixthar made his decision. He called for an emergency vote. The debate lasted 3 days. Some Council members argued that bringing humans into the galaxy would be like releasing a predator into a peaceful garden. Others said that any species that could survive on a Class 12 death world might be the only thing that could stop the Kravoth. The vote passed by a narrow margin. The Council would make first contact with humanity. They would send a distress signal to Earth and hope that these Death World warriors would answer. Lyraset crafted the message carefully. It included mathematical proofs that any scientific species would recognize. It included star charts showing the location of Council space. It included a simple, desperate plea for help. She encoded it in multiple formats and broadcast it toward Earth on every frequency humans used for communication. The message traveled through space at the speed of light. It would take time to reach Earth, more time for humans to decode and verify it, even more time for them to respond, if they chose to respond at all. Ambassador Zixthar returned to the observation deck and watched another world burn in the distance. He wondered if the Council had made the right choice. He wondered if humans would come. He wondered if they would be saviors or just another nightmare added to the one they already faced. The signal reached Earth 2 days later. Every radio telescope, every satellite, every communication array on the planet received it simultaneously. The message played across every frequency, impossible to miss, impossible to ignore. Scientists around the world scrambled to decode it. When they finally understood what it said, the message was simple but profound. Humanity was not alone in the universe, and someone out there needed help. The message ended with coordinates and a question that would change everything. Will you answer the call? Commander Jake Harrison stood in the Pentagon Situation Room, staring at the decoded alien message displayed across multiple screens. Around him, military leaders from every nation sat in stunned silence. The message had been verified by every scientific organization on Earth. This was real. This was happening. Jake was a career military officer who had served in conflicts around the globe. He had seen combat in deserts, jungles, mountains, and urban environments. He thought he had prepared for every possible scenario. He had been wrong. Nothing could have prepared him for this moment. The United Nations called an emergency session within hours. Every major government sent representatives. Old enemies sat side by side, united by something bigger than their conflicts. Russia, China, the United States, the European Union, India, Brazil, and dozens of other nations all agreed on one thing. Humanity would respond to this call. The debates began immediately. Some leaders argued for caution. They suggested sending only a small diplomatic team. Others wanted to send scientists to learn from this advanced civilization. But most understood what the message really meant. This was a call for military help. The Galactic Council needed warriors. General Lisa Torres took charge of the planning. She was a brilliant strategist who had spent 30 years in the military, rising through the ranks on merit and determination. She assembled a team of the best minds humanity had to offer. Soldiers, scientists, engineers, and tacticians who would figure out how to fight an interstellar war. The Galactic Council sent detailed information about their enemy. The data arrived through the same channels as the original message. What Jake and his team read made their blood run cold. The Kravoth were technologically superior in almost every way. Their weapons were more powerful. Their ships were faster. Their numbers were overwhelming. Colonel Ben Ramirez, an Air Force tactical specialist, spent days analyzing the Kravoth battle strategies. He noticed something interesting. The Kravoth fought in rigid formations. They relied on superior technology and overwhelming force. They had never needed to adapt because they had never faced a worthy opponent. That gave humanity an advantage. Humans specialized in asymmetric warfare. They knew how to fight opponents with better equipment. They understood how to use terrain, surprise, and unconventional tactics. Every human military on Earth had learned these lessons through hard experience. Admiral Kate Sullivan commanded the naval forces. She looked at the space combat data and saw parallels to submarine warfare. The Kravoth might have superior ships, but space was vast. There were places to hide, ambush points, and ways to turn the environment into a weapon. She began developing tactics that would work in three-dimensional combat. Dr. Chris Morrison led the scientific team. He was a physicist from MIT who specialized in experimental weapons technology. The Council provided them with samples of their technology, energy shields, faster-than-light drives, and plasma weapons. Chris and his team took that alien tech and began figuring out how to improve it with human engineering. The Council had followed certain rules when developing their technology. They valued safety, efficiency, and reliability. Humans valued effectiveness. Chris removed safety limiters from the energy weapons, increasing their power output by 40%. The weapons would overheat and burn out faster, but they would hit much harder. That was a trade humans were willing to make. Engineer Alex Chen worked on adapting human spacecraft for combat. Earth did not have faster-than-light travel yet, but the Council provided the technology. Alex took commercial spacecraft, military vehicles, and experimental prototypes, and began converting them into warships. They were ugly, improvised, and dangerous. They were also ready much faster than any Council species could have managed. Captain Sam Rodriguez commanded the Special Forces Division. He was selecting soldiers who would fight aboard alien ships and on foreign worlds. The requirements were brutal. Candidates needed to be physically strong, mentally tough, and able to adapt to completely unknown situations. They needed to operate in environments that might have different gravity, different atmospheres, and hostile alien life forms. Out of 50,000 volunteers, Sam selected 5,000. These were not just soldiers. They were the best humanity had produced. Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, Marine Force Recon, British SAS, Russian Spetsnaz, Chinese Special Forces, and elite units from every nation. They trained together for the first time in history, sharing techniques and knowledge. The training was intense. Scientists calculated that most Council species came from worlds with lower gravity than Earth. That meant human soldiers would be naturally stronger and faster. They could carry heavier equipment. They could endure longer battles. They could survive injuries that would kill most aliens. These advantages needed to be maximized. The soldiers practiced fighting in sealed suits that simulated alien environments. They learned to use Council weapons alongside human firearms. They studied the limited information available about Kravoth combat tactics. They prepared for every scenario they could imagine, knowing the real battle would surprise them anyway. Meanwhile, humanity transformed its industrial capacity. Factories that built cars began producing weapons. Shipyards that made ocean vessels started constructing spacecraft. The whole planet mobilized in ways not seen since the Great Wars of the 20th century. But this time, humanity was united. The media covered every development. People around the world watched as their species prepared for its first interstellar war. Some were afraid. Others were excited. Most understood the weight of what was happening. Humanity was about to announce itself to the galaxy, and they would do it as warriors. 6 months after receiving the distress signal, the fleet was ready. 30 ships cobbled together from human and alien technology. 5,000 soldiers, the finest warriors humanity could produce. Hundreds of engineers and scientists who would support operations and adapt to whatever they encountered. Medical teams trained in both human and alien biology. Support staff who would keep the fleet running. Commander Jake Harrison stood on the bridge of the flagship, a retrofitted space station that had been converted into a mobile command center. They had named it Resolution. The name felt appropriate. Humanity had made its decision. They would not hide on Earth while others fought and died. They would answer the call. The departure was broadcast worldwide. Billions watched as the fleet powered up its faster-than-light drives for the first time. The technology was strange and wonderful, bending space itself to achieve impossible speeds. In moments, they would cross distances that would take light years to traverse normally. General Lisa Torres gave the final speech from Earth. Her words were simple but powerful. She spoke about duty, courage, and the responsibility that came with power. Humanity had clawed its way to the top of one of the deadliest planets in the galaxy. Now they would use that hard-won strength to protect others. Jake felt the ship vibrate as the drives engaged. Space twisted around them in ways his eyes could not quite process. Then they were moving, accelerating to speeds that broke every law of physics he had learned. The stars stretched into lines of light. Earth vanished behind them. The journey would take 3 days. 3 days to reach a war that had already claimed billions of lives. 3 days to prepare for combat against an enemy that had never been defeated. 3 days for humanity to prove they belonged among the stars. Jake looked at his crew. They came from every nation, every culture, every background. But in this moment, they were simply humans. Warriors from a death world, heading into the unknown to fight for people they had never met. The galaxy was about to learn what that meant. The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Valonian system. Ambassador Zixthar stood in the command center, watching the sensors light up with new contacts. When the computer finished analyzing the incoming ships, he felt his heart skip several beats. The human vessels looked like nothing he had ever seen. They were cobbled together from different technologies, welded and bolted with apparent disregard for aesthetic beauty. Some still bore markings from their original purposes. Industrial haulers, research vessels, military craft, all transformed into weapons of war through sheer determination and engineering creativity. But it was not the ships that made Zixthar nervous. It was the beings inside them. The sensors showed life signs unlike anything in the Council database, massive compared to most species, high body temperature, cardiovascular systems that could pump blood under incredible pressure, bone density that suggested adaptation to crushing gravity. These were apex predators evolved on a world that would kill most Council species in days. Commander Jake Harrison sent a communication request. Zixthar accepted, and a holographic image appeared before him. The human was tall, powerfully built, with close-cropped hair and eyes that seemed to assess everything they saw. He wore a military uniform covered in insignia that meant nothing to the ambassador, but the bearing of the man told Zixthar everything he needed to know. This was a warrior. They spoke through translation devices that the Council had provided. Jake's voice was deep and steady. He introduced himself and his crew. He explained that humanity had come to help. He asked for a briefing on the current military situation. His tone was professional and calm, but Zixthar could see the intensity burning behind those strange, forward-facing predator eyes. The Council arranged a face-to-face meeting on the orbital station. Captain Laura Wright led the human delegation. She was the first human most Council species would meet in person, and she made an immediate impression. She stood nearly 7 feet tall with broad shoulders and visible muscle that spoke of incredible physical power. She moved with the fluid grace of a natural athlete, every step controlled and purposeful. When she extended her hand to shake Zixthar's, he felt the careful restraint in her grip. She could have crushed his bones without effort. But she held back, gentle despite her obvious strength. The gesture was polite, but it also demonstrated something important. These humans understood their own power and knew how to control it. The briefing took place in the main council chamber. Military advisors from various species presented their analysis of Kravoth capabilities. They showed tactical displays of previous battles. They explained why the council forces had been unable to stop the invasion. The information was grim, painting a picture of an enemy that seemed unbeatable. The human officers listened carefully, asking questions that surprised the council advisors. Lieutenant Danny Foster, a young tactical officer with sharp features and intense focus, wanted to know about Kravoth supply lines. Engineer Alex Chen asked about their manufacturing capabilities and resource-gathering methods. Colonel Ben Ramirez inquired about their communication networks and command structure. These were not the questions of beings preparing for traditional warfare. These were the questions of people who understood that superior technology could be defeated through indirect means. The council advisors began to realize that humans thought about combat very differently than they did. Admiral Kate Sullivan studied the star charts showing Kravoth positions. She pointed out that the enemy fleet was spread across multiple systems, occupying conquered worlds. That meant their forces were divided. Their supply lines were stretched thin. They were strong, but not invulnerable. Captain Sam Rodriguez asked a question that made several council members look uncomfortable. He wanted to know if the Kravoth had ever faced guerrilla warfare. The term did not translate well, Sam explained the concept using examples from human history: small units striking quickly and disappearing, sabotage, ambushes, psychological warfare, attacking when the enemy was weakest and avoiding direct confrontation when they were strong. The Council military commanders looked at each other in confusion. This was not how civilized species fought wars. They met in open battle with honor and clear rules of engagement. The human approach seemed dishonest, even cowardly to some. But they were desperate enough to listen. Jake outlined a strategy that made the Council advisors very nervous. The humans would not engage the main Kravoth fleet directly. That would be suicide. Instead, they would hit the enemy where they were vulnerable. Supply depots, communication relays, resource gathering operations. They would force the Kravoth to spread their forces even thinner, responding to threats from multiple directions. Lyra said. The scientist who had first proposed contacting humanity watched the presentation with growing fascination. The humans were doing exactly what she had predicted. They were not trying to match the Kravoth in technology or numbers. They were finding advantages in places the Kravoth did not even recognize as weaknesses. The meeting concluded with the Council agreeing to let humanity try their unconventional approach. They had nothing to lose. The war was already lost by conventional standards. If these Deathworld warriors wanted to attempt the impossible, the Council would provide whatever support they could. After the formal meeting ended, several Council members approached the humans privately. They wanted to understand these strange beings better. Zixthar spoke with Jake for over an hour, asking questions about Earth, human history, and why they had agreed to help a civilization they had never met. Jake's answer was simple but profound. He explained that humanity had spent most of its history fighting itself. Nation against nation, tribe against tribe, endless conflicts that had nearly destroyed them several times. But they had learned something important through all that violence. Unity was stronger than division. Protecting the weak was better than exploiting them. Sometimes the strong had a responsibility to fight for those who could not fight for themselves. Zixthar found himself deeply moved by these words. The humans were violent, yes. They were aggressive and dangerous. But they had also developed a moral code that valued sacrifice and service. They were warriors, but they were not monsters. The next day, the human fleet began operations. Sergeant Amy Lynn led the first mission. She commanded a team of 30 soldiers, specialists in infiltration and sabotage. They approached a Kravoth supply depot using stealth technology that combined Council cloaking devices with human electronic warfare techniques. The Kravoth never saw them coming. The soldiers moved through the facility like ghosts, their training allowing them to navigate completely alien environments with confidence. They placed charges at key structural points. They sabotaged equipment. They copied data from the computer systems, all without firing a single shot. When the explosives detonated, the depot and everything in it was destroyed. The blast was visible from orbit. 3 months of Kravoth supplies gone in seconds. The human team escaped without casualties, extracting through a route they had planned before even entering the facility. The Kravoth response was immediate and predictable. They sent a battle group to investigate. They found nothing but wreckage. No evidence of who had attacked them. No way to retaliate. For the first time in their history of conquest, they were fighting an enemy they could not see and could not catch. More raids followed. Human teams struck at different targets across multiple systems. Each attack was carefully planned and flawlessly executed. The Kravoth began pulling ships from their occupation forces to protect their infrastructure. Their advance slowed, then stopped. The Council watched in amazement as humanity demonstrated what they called asymmetric warfare. These Deathworld warriors were not trying to win through superior force. They were winning through superior thinking, taking apart the Kravoth war machine piece by piece. The galaxy was learning its first lesson about humans. When they came to war, they came to win, and they understood that winning did not always mean being the strongest. Sometimes it meant being the smartest, the most adaptable, and the most willing to do whatever was necessary. The Kravoth had never faced an opponent like this, and they were about to learn just how dangerous Deathworlders could be. The Kravoth War Council gathered aboard their flagship, deep in the heart of conquered space. War leader Krath studied reports from the front lines with growing frustration. In the past month, they had lost more resources than in their previous 5 campaigns combined. Supply depots destroyed, Communication arrays sabotaged, patrol ships ambushed and left drifting in space, and worst of all, they rarely saw their enemy. The Council forces had acquired new allies, warriors from a planet the Kravoth database did not recognize. The reports called them humans, and they fought like nothing Krath had ever encountered. They refused to engage in open battle where the Kravoth advantage was strongest. Instead, they struck from shadows, hit hard, and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. Krath ordered a change in strategy. If these humans would not face them in honorable combat, the Kravoth would force them out of hiding. He sent orders to increase attacks on civilian populations. The humans claimed to be protecting the Council species. Let them try to protect everyone at once. The order proved to be a fatal mistake. The human response was swift and overwhelming. Major Greg Powell commanded the aerospace wing. He led a squadron of 48 fighters, each one modified to push the limits of what pilots could endure. When the Kravoth fleet moved toward a civilian world, Greg's squadron intercepted them halfway there. The Kravoth ships outnumbered the humans 5-1. Their weapons were more powerful. Their shields were stronger. But they had never faced pilots like this. Human pilots could withstand gravitational forces that would knock most species unconscious. They performed maneuvers that seemed impossible, spinning and diving through three-dimensional space with absolute confidence. Greg led his squadron in a tactic called a split-tail run. Half the fighters engaged from the front, while the other half circled around behind. The Kravoth ships tried to respond, but human pilots moved too fast, reacted too quickly. Within minutes, 12 Kravoth vessels were destroyed or crippled. The rest retreated. The civilian world was saved. The Kravoth learned that threatening innocents would not draw humans into unfavorable battles. It would only make them fight harder. Captain Laura Wright led ground operations on a contested planet. The Kravoth had established a military base there, using it to coordinate attacks across the sector. The Council wanted the base destroyed, but conventional assault would cost thousands of lives. Laura proposed a different approach. Her team of 200 soldiers infiltrated the planet using drop pods, falling from orbit under the cover of a meteor shower. They landed 50 miles from the base and began a forced march through hostile terrain. The planet's environment was dangerous, with toxic plants and aggressive wildlife. For most species, it would have been impassable. For humans from Earth, it was just another day. They reached the base perimeter just before dawn. Lieutenant Eric Mason led the breaching team. They cut through the fence using equipment that made no sound. They disabled sensors with electromagnetic pulses. They moved through the compound with absolute silence, marking targets and planning their assault. When the attack began, it was devastating. The humans hit every critical point simultaneously. Power generators exploded. Command centers were breached. Weapon storage erupted in flames. The Kravoth defenders tried to respond, but they were disorganized and confused. They had never trained for this kind of assault. The battle lasted 3 hours. When it ended, the base was destroyed and 2,000 Kravoth soldiers were dead or captured. The human casualties were minimal, 23 wounded and 5 dead. Laura looked at those numbers and felt the weight of every loss. But she also knew the mission had saved countless lives across the sector. Dr. Rachel Kim worked with Council scientists to develop new defensive strategies. She introduced concepts from Earth biology and ecology, teaching them how to use environments as weapons. She showed them how to contaminate water supplies with harmless bacteria that the Kravoth could not filter, how to introduce pollen that would clog their air systems, how to turn every planet into an active participant in its own defense. The Council scientists were amazed and slightly horrified. They had never thought about warfare in these terms. Humans did not just fight with weapons. They fought with everything at their disposal, turning the universe itself into an ally. Commander Jake Harrison coordinated all human operations from the flagship. He worked closely with Council military leaders, teaching them human tactics while learning about alien capabilities. The collaboration produced innovations neither side could have achieved alone. Combined task forces that used Council technology and human strategy. Integrated command structures that maximized both species' strengths. Corporal Linda Santos became a legend among Council soldiers. She led a rescue mission into a Kravoth prisoner camp, extracting 300 captives from impossible odds. She fought through enemy lines with a ferocity that terrified the Kravoth guards. When she emerged carrying 2 wounded Council soldiers, one under each arm, The alien troops watching understood why humans were called Deathworlders. Private Kevin Bryant saved an entire medical ship when it came under attack. He manned a gun position alone after the rest of his crew was wounded, holding off Kravoth fighters for 20 minutes until reinforcements arrived. He took multiple hits that would have killed most beings. He kept fighting. When medics finally reached him, they found wounds that should have been fatal. He was still conscious and asking about his crewmates. Stories like these spread through both fleets. The Council species began to understand what humanity brought to this war. Not just tactics and weapons, but an indomitable spirit forged on a world that tried to kill them every day. They did not know how to quit. The concept of surrender was foreign to them when lives were on the line. The Kravoth, for the first time in their history, began to feel fear. They had conquered hundreds of worlds through superior technology and overwhelming force. But technology meant nothing if you could not catch your enemy. Force meant nothing if your opponent refused to be intimidated. They were fighting warriors who saw every disadvantage as a challenge to overcome. 2 months into the campaign, the strategic situation had completely reversed. The Kravoth advance had stopped. They were losing ground, pulling back to consolidate their forces. The Council and Human Alliance was pushing forward, reclaiming worlds one by one. Admiral Kate Sullivan proposed the most ambitious operation yet. A direct strike against the Kravoth home fleet, the massive armada that protected their conquered territories and served as their mobile command center. It was defended by over 500 warships, including their largest dreadnoughts. Attacking it would be suicide by any reasonable calculation. Jake listened to the plan and smiled grimly. Humans had a saying about reasonable calculations. Reasonable was for people who wanted to play it safe. Humanity had answered a distress call from across the galaxy. They had joined a war against overwhelming odds. They had changed the course of battles that everyone said were unwinnable. Reasonable had never been part of the equation. The Council military command argued against the operation. The losses would be catastrophic. The chance of success was minimal. They had fought a good campaign so far. Why risk everything on one desperate gamble? Colonel Ben Ramirez explained the human perspective. Every day this war continued, more people died. Every world that remained under Kravoth control suffered. Playing it safe meant prolonging the conflict. Bold action meant the possibility of ending it. The risk was enormous, but the potential reward was worth it. Ambassador Zixthar cast the deciding vote. He had called these warriors to the galaxy. He had seen what they could do. If humanity said they could strike at the heart of the Kravoth fleet, he would trust them. The Council would commit all available forces to the operation. The fleet assembled in secret, building strength for a single decisive blow. Human and Council ships training together, preparing for the largest space battle in galactic history. Soldiers checked their equipment and said goodbye to friends, knowing many would not return. Everyone understood the stakes. As the fleet prepared to depart, Jake stood on the bridge of resolution and looked at the faces around him. Humans and aliens working side by side, united by a common cause. This was what they had come here to do. This was why they had answered the call. The order was given. The fleet jumped to faster than light speed. The final battle was about to begin. The combined fleet emerged from faster than light travel at the edge of the Kravoth home system. Commander Jake Harrison watched the tactical display light up with enemy contacts. 547 Kravoth warships arranged in defensive formations around their mobile command fortress, the largest concentration of military power the galaxy had ever seen. Against them, the Alliance fielded 200 ships. The numbers were terrible. The odds were worse than terrible. But Jake had learned something important during his time fighting this war. Numbers only mattered if you fought the way your enemy expected. The plan was complex, relying on precise timing and perfect execution. Admiral Kate Sullivan would lead the main fleet in what appeared to be a conventional assault. The Kravoth would respond with their standard tactics, deploying ships to meet the threat head-on. That was when the real attack would begin. Captain Sam Rodriguez commanded 5 special operations teams aboard stealthed insertion craft. Their mission was to penetrate the Kravoth defensive sphere and strike at the command fortress itself. It was a suicide run by any reasonable assessment. Sam and his people had volunteered anyway. The battle began with a massive missile barrage. Thousands of projectiles streaked across space toward the Kravoth lines. The enemy activated their point defense systems, shooting down the incoming fire with practiced efficiency. They had defended against this kind of attack countless times before. They were confident in their defenses. That confidence was their first mistake. Hidden among the real missiles were decoys packed with electronic warfare equipment. When they got close enough to the Kravoth fleet, they activated simultaneously. Sensors scrambled. Communication networks jammed. Fire control systems went haywire. The Kravoth defensive formation descended into chaos. Kate seized the moment. Her fleet charged forward, using the confusion to close the distance before the Kravoth could reform their lines. Human pilots flew with reckless courage, weaving through enemy fire that should have been impossible to survive. Council ships followed in their wake, protected by the holes the humans carved through the enemy formation. Major Greg Powell led the fighter screen. His squadron engaged Kravoth interceptors in a swirling dogfight that covered hundreds of miles of space. The fighting was brutal and fast. Ships exploded in silence. Pilots died in seconds. But the humans held their ground, refusing to break even when outnumbered 3-1. Greg watched his wing leader's ship take a direct hit and disintegrate. He swallowed his grief and kept fighting. There would be time to mourn later, if any of them survived. Right now, the mission was all that mattered. While the main battle raged, Sam's insertion team slipped through the chaos. Their stealth systems were working perfectly, bending sensor beams around them and making them invisible to Kravoth detection. They approached the command fortress from 6 different angles, coordinating their movements through tight beam communications. The fortress was massive, larger than most space stations. It bristled with weapons and housed thousands of Kravoth soldiers. Breaking into it should have been impossible, but Sam had studied the captured intelligence data carefully. He knew where the weak points were. More importantly, he knew that the Kravoth had never considered someone would be crazy enough to try this. His team attached shaped charges to an auxiliary airlock. The explosion blew the door inward and the humans poured through the breach. Alarms shrieked. Blast doors began closing. Sam's people moved fast, racing through corridors designed for beings half their size. They had to duck and sometimes crawl, but their training kept them moving. The Kravoth guards responded quickly, but they had never fought humans in close quarters before. The humans were faster, stronger, and far more aggressive. Sergeant Amy Lynn led her squad through a barracks section, clearing rooms with brutal efficiency. The Kravoth soldiers tried to fight back. They died in seconds. Lieutenant Danny Foster reached the primary reactor control room first. His team fought through 3 layers of security, leaving bodies in their wake. Danny planted the explosive charges himself, his hands steady despite the chaos around him. The charges were set to detonate on a timer. 30 minutes, enough time to complete the mission and maybe, just maybe, escape. War Leader Krath stood in the command center, watching his perfect defensive strategy fall apart. The human and council fleet was pushing deeper into his formation than should have been possible. His ships were taking damage faster than they could repair, and now alarms were blaring throughout the fortress. Intruders had breached the hull. Impossible. No one could have penetrated his defenses. Sam Rodriguez stood outside the command center door. Inside, the Kravoth leadership coordinated their entire military operation. Every order, every tactical decision came from this room. If they could take it, the battle was won. If they failed, they would die here. Sam checked his weapon, looked at his remaining team members, and nodded. They breached the door. The firefight was short and violent. Krath's personal guards were elite soldiers, well-trained and well-armed. But they were fighting humans in an enclosed space. The outcome was never in doubt. When the shooting stopped, Sam stood face-to-face with the war leader himself. Krath looked at the human warrior and finally understood what his empire had encountered. These were not weak council species who could be intimidated into surrender. These were apex predators from a world that had tried to kill them since birth. They did not know fear the way other species did. They knew only determination. Sam gave the order to evacuate. The charges were counting down. The human teams fought their way back to the insertion craft, carrying their wounded and leaving no one behind. Private Kevin Bryant stayed at a choke point, holding off Kravoth reinforcements until his teammates could escape. He took multiple hits but kept firing until the last human was through. Then he ran, his armor sparking from weapon damage. The insertion craft launched just as the explosives detonated. The fortress's reactor went critical in a cascade failure that Danny had specifically designed. The explosion was visible across the entire star system. The command center, War Leader Krath and 3,000 Kravoth soldiers ceased to exist in a flash of nuclear fire. The Kravoth fleet reacted exactly as human strategists had predicted. Without central command, the individual ship captains panicked. Some tried to retreat, others attempted to continue fighting. The coordination that had made them so effective disintegrated. They became 500 separate ships instead of one unified force. Kate pressed the advantage. Her fleet tore into the disorganized Kravoth ships, targeting command vessels and communication relays. Council ships that had spent months learning human tactics fought with new confidence. They had seen that the enemy could bleed. They had seen that victory was possible. The battle raged for 16 hours. Ships on both sides were destroyed. Thousands of soldiers died in the cold vacuum of space, but slowly, inevitably, the Kravoth formation collapsed. Individual ships began surrendering. Others attempted to flee. The fleet that had conquered 12 worlds in 12 days was broken. Jake stood on the Bridge of Resolution, watching the tactical display show the last Kravoth ships retreating. They had done it. Against overwhelming odds, through sacrifice and courage, they had won the greatest military victory in galactic history. But the victory had cost them dearly. 23 human ships destroyed, 2,000 human casualties, thousands more wounded. The names and faces would haunt Jake for the rest of his life. These warriors had come to a foreign galaxy to fight for people they did not know. They had paid the ultimate price for strangers. As the fleet regrouped and began search and rescue operations, Jake sent a message back to Earth. It was simple but carried the weight of everything they had accomplished. Mission accomplished. The Kravoth are defeated. Humanity has earned its place among the stars. 3 months after the battle, Ambassador Zixthar stood before the full Galactic Council Assembly. The chamber was packed with representatives from all 47 member species. They had gathered to debate something unprecedented in 3,000 years of Council history. The immediate admission of a new species, bypassing all traditional protocols and probationary periods. The debate had raged for weeks. Some council members argued that humanity was too violent, too aggressive, too dangerous to integrate into peaceful galactic society. They pointed to human history, to the wars and conflicts that had defined their species. They worried about what would happen when these Deathworld warriors no longer had an enemy to fight. Others argued that humanity had saved the council when no one else could. They had sacrificed thousands of lives to protect civilizations they had never met. They had demonstrated courage, honor, and a moral code that valued protecting the weak. They deserved recognition for what they had accomplished. Zixthar listened to both sides before rising to speak. His voice carried across the chamber with quiet authority. He reminded the council of those desperate days when the Kravoth seemed unstoppable. He described the fear that had gripped every world as the enemy advanced. He spoke of the moment when they decided to call for help from a species they had never contacted. Then he invited Commander Jake Harrison to address the council personally. Jake entered the chamber in his military uniform, walking with the confident stride of a career officer. He stood before beings from dozens of different worlds and spoke with simple honesty. He acknowledged humanity's violent past. He did not try to hide or excuse it. Humans had fought wars for resources, territory, ideology, and sometimes for no good reason at all. They had developed weapons that could destroy their own planet. They had come close to extinction through their own actions more than once. But he also spoke of what humanity had learned through all that conflict. They had learned that working together was better than fighting alone. They had learned that protecting others was more important than dominating them. They had learned that strength without purpose was just destruction. But strength used to defend those who could not defend themselves was noble. Jake explained that humanity answered the distress call not because they sought glory or conquest. They came because it was the right thing to do. They came because someone needed help and they had the ability to provide it. That was who humans were. Warriors when necessary, but also explorers, scientists, artists, and dreamers who wanted to be part of something greater than themselves. The council chamber fell silent when Jake finished speaking. Then slowly representatives began to rise in support. First 1, then 5, then 20. Species that had doubted humanity now stood to welcome them. The vote was called. When the counting finished, Humanity had been accepted as the 48th member of the Galactic Council. The news reached Earth within hours. Cities erupted in celebration. Humanity had joined a galactic community, thousands of years older than their own civilization. They would gain access to technology, knowledge, and opportunities that would have taken centuries to develop on their own. The doors to the stars had opened wide, but membership came with responsibilities. General Lisa Torres established the Joint Defense Initiative, a combined military force that would protect Council space from future threats. Human officers began training Council soldiers in tactics and strategies that had proven effective against the Kravoth. Council species learned about asymmetric warfare, guerrilla tactics, and the importance of adaptability in combat. Captain Laura Wright became the first human to command a Council vessel. She took charge of a cruiser with a mixed crew of humans and aliens. The assignment was partly symbolic, but it also demonstrated how far integration had progressed. Her crew worked together seamlessly, combining the best qualities of multiple species into something greater than the sum of its parts. Dr. Rachel Kim joined the Council Scientific Directorate. She brought Earth's unique perspective on biology, ecology, and planetary sciences. Her work led to breakthroughs in environmental protection, terraforming technology, and understanding how different life forms could coexist. The Council had extensive knowledge, but humans added practical experience from surviving on one of the galaxy's most challenging worlds. Engineer Alex Chen worked with alien scientists on combined technology projects. They discovered that human engineering philosophy, born from centuries of making do with limited resources, complemented Council theoretical knowledge perfectly. Together, they created innovations neither could have achieved separately. Weapons became more efficient. Ships became faster. Defensive systems became stronger. The warriors who had fought in the HFY War returned to Earth as heroes. They had answered an impossible call and succeeded against overwhelming odds. Their sacrifice had opened doors that would benefit all of humanity for generations to come. Monuments were built in every major city honoring those who had died. Their names were carved in stone so they would never be forgotten. Admiral Kate Sullivan retired from active service but continued working as a strategic advisor. She taught at the new Joint Military Academy, training the next generation of officers from multiple species. Her students included humans, Valonians, Theran, and dozens of other races, all learning to work together as a unified force. Colonel Ben Ramirez wrote a comprehensive guide to human military tactics that became required reading at every Council military installation. Species that had known only peace for generations now studied the arts of war that humans had developed through hard necessity. The knowledge was sobering, but it was also essential for defending against future threats. 5 years after the war ended, the Kravoth attempted another invasion. They had rebuilt their forces and believed the Council had grown complacent. They discovered their mistake immediately. The fleet that met them included human warships, Council vessels using hybrid technology, and commanders who had learned to combine the best of both civilizations. The Kravoth retreated after the first engagement. They had faced this enemy before and knew they could not win. More importantly, they saw that the galaxy had changed. The Council was no longer a collection of peaceful species that could be conquered. They had become something new, something dangerous when threatened. The Kravoth requested peace negotiations for the first time in their history. Ambassador Zixthar led those negotiations. He insisted that humans be included at the table. The Kravoth agreed reluctantly, still wary of the warriors who had defeated them. The resulting treaty brought an end to centuries of Kravoth expansion. They would return conquered worlds and join the galactic community as productive members rather than conquerors. Jake Harrison retired from military service 10 years after first contact. He had given a decade of his life to building bridges between humanity and the galaxy. He had seen friends die and watched his people prove themselves worthy of their place among the stars. Now it was time to let the next generation lead. On his last day in uniform, Jake visited the memorial for fallen soldiers on the Council homeworld. The monument listed every name of those who had died in the Kravoth War, human and alien side by side. He stood there for a long time, remembering faces and voices that would never grow old. Zixthar found him there as the sun set over the monument. The ambassador had aged in the past decade, but his eyes still held the same determination that had driven him to send that desperate message to Earth so long ago. They stood together in comfortable silence. Finally, Zixthar spoke. He thanked Jake for everything humanity had done. He admitted that many council members had doubted the wisdom of contacting Deathworlders. They had feared bringing violence into their peaceful galaxy. Jake smiled at that. He pointed out that violence had already come to the galaxy in the form of the Kravoth. Humanity had simply provided the tools and knowledge to fight back. More importantly, they had shown that strength and compassion were not opposites. The strongest beings could also be the most gentle. Warriors could be protectors. Zixthar agreed. The galaxy had changed forever when that distress signal reached Earth. The Council had learned that peace required the ability to defend itself. Humanity had learned that they were not alone in the universe. Both civilizations were better for having found each other. As they walked away from the memorial, Jake looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, Earth orbited its yellow sun, a blue and green world of crushing gravity, violent weather, and deadly life forms. A world that had forged a species tough enough to survive anywhere, compassionate enough to help strangers, and brave enough to answer a call from across the galaxy. The age of humanity among the stars had truly begun. They had proven themselves as warriors. Now they would prove themselves as explorers, scientists, diplomats, and friends. The galaxy would never be the same. And perhaps that was exactly what it needed. The call for help had summoned Deathworlders to alien worlds. Those Deathworlders had become defenders, teachers, and ultimately family. The story of first contact would be told for generations across 1,000 worlds. And every time it was told, people would remember the simple truth that started it all. When someone needs help, you answer the call.